U.S. President Biden's withdrawal from the U.S. presidential race comes less than a month ahead of the Democratic Party convention, which begins August 19th. He has so far endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris, but other names are also being suggested as potential successors.
U.S. President Joe Biden has withdrawn from the presidential race. There are now just weeks to go until this year's Democratic convention, where he would have been officially anointed as his party's presidential nominee. The question now is, what happens next? How will the Democrats select a new nominee? One answer is through what is known as an open convention. The last time the Democrats held an open convention was in 1968. It descended into chaos as tempers flared over the Vietnam War, both inside and outside the building. This is one of the reasons the rules were changed and parties have since steered clear. But it remains a legitimate way of picking a candidate. It means rather than confirming a nominee selected in the primaries, as Biden was, delegates would have to choose a new nominee in an open and potentially fierce competition. This year, around 99% of some 4,000 delegates at the Democratic National Convention are pledged to Joe Biden. But now that he has stepped aside, they are free to back whichever candidate they want. Biden has already endorsed current Vice President Kamala Harris to be the nominee. Other names floated include California Governor Gavin Newsom and Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan. Delegates would just have to keep voting until one of them achieved a majority and was declared the winner. Critics of the open convention method say it would be a free-for-all which could expose divisions within the Democratic Party, as the new candidates battle it out and try to win the support of the newly freed-up delegates. Divisions that could potentially alienate voters in November. But others say that it is a risk worth taking if this is the only way to beat Donald Trump.
Ethan Bearman is a U.S. political commentator and adjunct professor at the Loyola Law School in Los Angeles. We asked him why he thought Biden decided to withdraw.
Well, I believe he probably met with his advisors. He was under a lot of pressure, and the timing is right. So the Republican convention is over. It's leading into the Democratic convention on August 19th in Chicago, Illinois. And this is perfect. It catches the Trump campaign off guard. They were ready to fight over Biden, and now they have a strong, young, in the prime of her life, Kamala Harris, the vice president, who's a former prosecutor. And Donald Trump is now the oldest person ever to run for president of the United States.
Well, as we have been hearing, Kamala Harris actually has slightly worse polling numbers than Biden. Why do you think she is such a good choice for the Democratic nomination?
Well, all you have to do is look at the reactions across the Democratic Party here in the United States today. There's tremendous excitement. She appeals to the younger generations, to the millennials, to Gen Z, whereas President Biden was not connecting with them the same way. She is, and she's already received the endorsements of key people, President Bill Clinton, Secretary Hillary Clinton, Secretary John Kerry. We can go on and on down all the key senators. Representative James Clyburn, who was key to President Biden's victory, just came out and announced his endorsement of Kamala Harris. I think that this was a very good move at the right time.
So as you're saying there, it sounds like the Democratic Party is closing ranks around Kamala Harris. So do you think her nomination is now a shoo-in at the next Democratic convention?
Well, I would hope it's a shoo-in, because this is not the time for the Democrats to be busy fighting amongst each other now. Now is the time for them to hurry up, get behind Kamala Harris, the vice president, the current vice president, and start the process to quickly whittle down who should be the vice presidential candidate alongside her by the time we get to the Democratic convention in Chicago.
And do you think there's already a short list of possible VP nominees for Kamala Harris should she get the nomination?
I'm sure that there is. I've heard names like Governor Josh Shapiro of Pennsylvania. He's an incredibly strong governor, a former attorney general himself. Pennsylvania is a key swing state. Senator Mark Kelly, an astronaut from Arizona who won in a red state, would be a strong candidate. Governor Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan, again, a very important key swing state. She's a strong leader in the Democratic Party. And by the way, if the Democrats wanted to do something really kind of wild to shake things up, why not somebody like Tom Hanks while they're at it?
Now, vice presidents often have trouble getting out of the shadow of the president. What does Kamala Harris have to do now to differentiate herself from the administration of Joe Biden?
I don't know that she has to do a lot to differentiate herself. You know, President Joe Biden had a very consequential term of creating a massive number of jobs, over 15.7 million jobs. Unemployment was even lower than it was under President Trump before the pandemic. He passed the Science and Chips Act. He passed the PACT Act for veterans, the Inflation Reduction Act. Just it's a huge set of accomplishments, let alone pulling together all of our allies to face down Vladimir Putin in Europe. I mean, she just needs to continue what President Biden has done through his first 3.5 years.
Now, what does this mean for the Republicans and Trump more broadly? How do they pivot from their all-out attack stance on Joe Biden and now pivot to this new Democratic campaign, which may have gotten fresh wind from Joe Biden stepping aside?
Interestingly enough, former President Donald Trump sent out an unhinged post on his social media platform claiming he wants money back because President Biden stepped down. So what you're going to see is an unprecedented series of personal attacks on Kamala Harris, focused on her time as district attorney in San Francisco years ago, and that's their biggest set of attacks. Otherwise, she has quite the track record. She was a strong senator as well before becoming vice president, and so they're going to be doing a lot of personal attacks and attempts to subvert the Democratic Party by creating chaos with kind of what are called AstroTurf campaigns.
What does this mean for Joe Biden moving forward? I mean, if we're looking at his legacy here, is he going to be known as a president who held on too long and kind of hurt his own party's brand, or do you think his legacy can recover from his decision to stick it out so long?
Well, I think you have an argument there regarding held on too long. Obviously, many would have liked to have seen, if this was going to have happened much earlier in the campaign cycle. However, he has over 5 decades of tremendous experience in Washington, D.C., working for our country, selflessly dedicating himself to this country after all kinds of personal tragedies that have happened to him and his family. And he will go down in history, I believe, as one of the greatest presidents to pull us out of a pandemic and face down these huge new threats from places like Russia and China and pulling our allies together. This has been a very consequential term for President Biden.
All right, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. That was Ethan Bearman, U.S. political commentator and adjunct professor at the Loyola Law School in Los Angeles. Thank you very much for your analysis.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
For more, we're now joined by DW's own Brent Goff here in the studio. So, Brent, Biden finally bowed to weeks of mounting pressure. What do you think actually caused him to finally take this step?
Well, what we do know is that people close to him have reportedly said that the decision was made about 48 hours ago. But what happened between, let's say, Friday evening and Sunday evening, your guess is as good as mine. What we do know is that for years we've been hearing grumblings within both parties about the questionable fitness of Biden for office. And 24 days ago, with the debate debacle, it's just been getting louder and louder. It's been a snowball effect. Now, you've had more and more high-level, high-ranking Democrats come out, either privately or publicly, saying that he should step aside. And the donors as well have been threatening to freeze money that normally would automatically be going to him. And as you and I both know, without money, there is no campaign in the United States.
But I mean, let's go back for a second. We've been hearing back in Biden's initial run, he wanted to be a one-term president. Why did he stick around, even when there were so many questions about his health and his fitness to serve?
Well, everyone, if you were to ask people on the street about that, they would probably tell you that they understood that to mean that he was going to be a one-term president, right? A bridge to the future. After the NATO 75th anniversary conference, he was asked by reporters at a press conference this very question: you ran as a bridge candidate, what has changed? And his answer was, our national security situation has become dire, or more dire than it was 4 years ago. He said our politics have become more polarized, and he said the threats coming from China and Russia are greater today than they were 4 years ago. That may well be true, but I don't think that that was a convincing argument. I think that most people would look at Joe Biden today and, despite all the respect that they have, would see a man who simply has not been able to see the writing on the wall.
All right, but when it comes to the writing on the wall now, he has said he wants to see his vice president succeed him as the Democratic candidate. Now, is this a foregone conclusion? Is she the de facto candidate, or could we see a dark horse coming in?
No, she is not. I mean, the inevitability of her nomination may seem to be inevitable, but it's not. What she has to do, and sources tell us that in the last 12 hours, she's been on the phone calling members of Congress, trying to drum up support. She knows that she has to get those more than 4,500 delegates' votes at the Democratic National Convention next month. They have to vote for her. So she may seem like she would be the anointed one to follow Joe Biden, but that is not a given. And you and I were talking about possible other people. Let me just go through this list here of people who could possibly get the nomination. There's the governor of North Carolina, Roy Cooper. There's the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro. I take that back. Josh Shapiro has already said that he is not running. There's the Senator Mark Kelly from Arizona, and there's Gavin Newsom, the governor of Colorado. Now, what would be the benefit of having a gubernatorial candidate become your presidential candidate over having Kamala Harris? It would be harder, according to pollsters, it would be harder for the Republicans, i.e. Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, to blame a gubernatorial candidate for inflation, for the border crisis, for the U.S. not forcing an end to the war in Ukraine. These are all things that a president or a vice president could be held accountable for. You can't hold a governor accountable for that. So all of these candidates, no one has come out and said that they want the job, but there's been silence, too. They haven't said that they're not interested. So it's wide open.
And when it comes to these candidates, what do you think would be the most probable outcome? Do you think we could see her taking a VP that is from the gubernatorial electoral experience type of candidate, or do you think we could be seeing something completely different? Do you think they'd be running against her in an open convention, or are we talking about a joint ticket?
I think that anything and everything right now is possible because these are uncharted waters. We haven't really seen a situation exactly like this. And we've got 3 weeks until we get the Democratic National Convention going. By then, if you talk to Democratic insiders, they'll tell you that they want this thing clarified as soon as possible. And we can't forget, early voting for the November presidential election begins in a couple of months in some states. So, I mean, you've got a very narrow window of opportunity for the Democrats to pull a surprise out of their hat, someone that they think can defeat Donald Trump, and to garner support among your delegates as well as the public. That's a tall order for any political party.
Well, it definitely is a tall order, and this election campaign has been nothing if not surprising.
Yeah.
That was DW's Brent Goff joining me in the studio. Let's cross now to Chris Devine. He's an associate professor of political science at the University of Dayton in Ohio. He is also the author of Do Running Mates Matter? The Influence of Vice Presidential Candidates in Presidential Elections. So let's turn right now to VP Kamala Harris. How has she performed as a vice president so far?
According to the American people, not very well. She's pulled consistently a little under Joe Biden. As viewers may know, Joe Biden's approval rating for quite a while now has been around 40%, really low 40s at least usually. Typically, she's a couple points under that. That's hard to interpret, though, because I'm not sure how much Americans are familiar with even some of the things you were referencing there about what she's been doing on a day-to-day basis. VPs often have a hard time getting out of the shadow of the president, even during a campaign situation. That's going to be complicated for her. I think when people are reacting to Kamala Harris as a vice president, most of them are reacting to Joe Biden as a president, and then also kind of taxing her for not being in a leadership role, which, of course, vice presidents are supposed to follow, not lead. They follow the lead of the president.
And you're certainly right. At least my impression has also been that it's been hard for Kamala Harris to get out of Joe Biden's shadow in the last 3 years. So why is he actually sticking to her when her polling numbers are worse than his?
No, it's not clear that anybody else would do better. I think one of the things we have to factor in is that while there are, for example, governors, as were mentioned earlier, I think of Gretchen Whitmer, Gavin Newsom, or others, they may poll better in certain situations, depends which poll you're looking at, but they're also not nationally known in the way that she is. As was just said, she has the highest name recognition. So while certain people might perform well in their state, it's hard to know how they'll be received nationally, especially once they get the kind of press scrutiny that comes with being in a national race. Kamala Harris has been through that. She ran in the presidential primaries, not very well, but then she ran for the vice presidency, so she's been vetted. She's more of a known quantity. I think this is the least risky option that Democrats have. I should point out also that as the first woman to be vice president, and a woman of color at that, it would be especially difficult for Democrats to pass her over. For example, for someone like Gavin Newsom, a white man in that case, that could be taken not well by some key constituencies in the Democratic Party.
Well, as you were just saying, Harris's own campaign for president in 2020 failed to gain any traction. So what does she need to do differently now?
You know, it's a different animal running in presidential primary versus now, assuming that she does come away with the nomination. Running in a general election. She doesn't have to follow the same kind of strategy that you would to get the nomination. This is different. She's gone through that national campaign as well, so she has more experience to draw on. Presumably, she would have learned some things about how to campaign better, and especially how to really seize on a message that will work for her. That's one of the things I'm interested to see in the coming days as she emerges. I think it seems likely as the presumptive presidential nominee. What is her rationale for the campaign? Obviously, a big part of this is going to be what she'll paint as success to the Biden administration, also concerns about what a second Trump administration would look like. But what about her in particular? What's her purpose? What's her theme for this campaign? I think that could tell you a lot about what kind of campaign she's going to run, how well she's going to run the campaign. By the way, it could also tell us about who to expect for a VP pick.
Yeah, and that's actually the next question I wanted to ask you. Who do you think she's going to end up choosing from? Is it one of the names that could be her potential opponents if it was an open convention, or will it be a dark horse candidate?
Yeah, it's very hard to say. We're so early in this. I will say one thing you'll hear a lot about is that she should easily pick off a state by choosing that state's governor. If she chose Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, she'd pick up Pennsylvania. If it was Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan, she'd pick up Michigan, or Roy Cooper in North Carolina. I'd urge viewers to be very skeptical of that. This is something that I've done a lot of research on. We call the home state advantage, that you would do better in the VP candidate's home state. We see that kind of home state advantage for presidential candidates, but not for vice presidential candidates. So while that doesn't make any of the ones that I just named a bad pick, actually I think Gretchen Whitmer in particular would be a good one. I would caution against making that kind of a judgment simply based on which state they would come from. They come from as if voters just, automatically vote for a ticket if the VP comes from their state.
All right, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. That was Chris Devine, Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Dayton in Ohio.
Thank you.